Hello everybody. So in this video we're going to go over the parts of the kidney as well as the filtering units of it so that we can trace how urine filters out of your body from beginning filtrate all the way back out of your body to the end. We're going to be going through a few different models on this one, the majority of which though is going to be on this lovely long model that shows you different stages of being zoomed in to the kidney. Right? Let's begin. You guys already know some of these terms, and I know you know them, right? What's that thing on the outside of the kidney, right? That's the capsule or fibrous capsule that protects the kidney. Y'all already knew that term? I already know you're all smart and good at this. We've been through this with a couple other organs, like your lymph nodes and your lungs too. What's that one part of the anatomy where all of these blood vessels go into your organ and other tubes come out? Why, that region right around here is called the hilum of your organ. So the hilum of your kidney is this region right here. Remember the hilum of your lungs where all of the blood vessels and the trachea went into them? Same deal here. Y'all got your renal artery and your renal veins and your ureters coming out of the kidney in the same area. This is the hilum, right? So we've come back to this time and time again when we're talking about organs. If we're looking at our kidney here, you can see that there are these nice little triangle-shaped, stringy inside softy bits, right? And then this outer cover, you can even see how triangle-y this is because they're actually three-dimensional and pyramid shaped. That'll come in handy later. So you have this lovely little pyramid here, and all of these, if they weren't cut, would be pyramids, right? And then you have this outer meaty part with meaty columns in between, right? You guys know what two words I'm aiming for. What is the meaty part of your organ and structure always called here? The cortex. So all this region here, that's the meatier region, is called the cortex. And what are these stringy inside bits called? The medulla. Y'all got this. You already knew those two words. Don't even fake, right? So that's your medulla, right? And like I've mentioned with your medulla, these stringier structures here are three-dimensional and they are all pyramid shaped, just like this lovely guy is here. See, you can see how he is a round pyramid here. That is your renal medulla, right? So this is called a renal pyramid, renal medulla, like medullary pyramid. Your lab list calls it the renal pyramid, right? Renal columns are the meaty columns between the medullas, right? And now we're going to get into the slightly new information for you guys, right? Your medullas are all, the reason why they're stringy is there's a lot of tubes in there, and we're about to get in that in a minute. But all of these tubes come together at the tip of the medulla, where you see like it has like this little white cap here on all of these medullas. That little white cap there is called the renal papillae, right? So that is a renal papillae, which is where all the tubes that are collecting the urine dump out of. And these renal papillae then dump the urine into these small little tubes here called a minor calyx. I know calyx is weird. The singular is called calyx and it's spelled C-A-L-Y-X. Because it's a weird Latin word where they don't like X's and don't treat them like regular letters, the plural of calyx is calyces, which is calyces, C-A-L-C-Y-C-E-S, basically. But it's going to end in a C-E-S instead of an X because X's are weird that way, right? So you have a minor calyx here, and the places where multiple minor calyces meet is a major calyx. So the renal papillae are dumping urine into a minor calyx, which come together to make major calyx. And then where all of the major calyces combine into the beginning of this big giant area here, this is called the renal pelvis. And then the renal pelvis everything that ends up in your renal pelvis is going to then flow out down the ureter. Right? So far we know that urine actually is created and filtered somewhere in the medulla. It collects in the renal papillae. In the renal papillae, it flows from renal papillae to minor calyx, which then combine into major calyces or major calyx to then get to your renal pelvis to then go down the ureter. But we need to go a little bit deeper than this into those tubes and understand those tubes a little bit more, which is where the next part of this model comes in, because we can move over on this model to here to get a close-up of this magical medulla here, right? So we can see these tubes that are all running up and down the medulla that are filtering and collecting all of this urine, right? So from here, these big tubes that are running down out of your medulla are called collecting ducts. So the collecting ducts collect all of the urine and then meet at the renal papillae, which dump into a minor calyx, right? But each of these individual collecting ducts are connected to a bunch of these filtration structures called nephrons, right? And we know that the nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. It's what actually filters your blood and creates the waste. So we're now going to start at the nephron, looking at these tubes, right? Each nephron has a part here called a renal corpuscle, right? So here we have the renal corpuscle, and as you can see, there are many of them around the medulla. There are actually two types of nephrons, and they are named based upon how close they are to this medulla. So you have some nephrons that are like this one, that start way from, like you can see this part of the kidney here, this is the fibrous capsule. And some of these nephrons have their corpuscles way out here in the cortex, because this is the cortex, right? Way out here in the cortex, where most of these tubes are in the cortex, right? These nephrons are called cortical nephrons because most of their tubes are in the cortex. The other type of nephrons are the ones that start way closer to the medulla here. And notice how these nephrons end up having, like, their loops of Henle go down lower. They are like more stringy and they get further down into this medulla. And they are closer to the border of the medulla and cortex here. That's why these nephrons have a different name. And they are called juxtamedullary nephrons. So juxta means next to in Latin. Like when you juxtapose something in English, you are comparing two things next to each other. These are juxtamedullary, meaning they are next to the medulla nephrons. So juxtamedullary nephrons, right? And each and every single one of these nephron bundles start at the renal corpuscle, which is where the filtration happens, or is created. The filtrate is created there, out of your blood. And the tubes have to end up filtering the stuff that is filtered out of your blood and getting all that filtrate down to the status of urine before it gets to these collecting ducts, right? And it goes through a few tubes to do that. We start at the renal corpuscle here. And then these tubes are named for how close they are to this renal corpuscle. So the next part of the tube is the proximal convoluted tubule. Convoluted because these are all twisty and turny and slightly confusing. They are tiny tubes, so tubule, and it is proximal to the renal corpuscle. So this proximal convoluted tubule then flows into this little loop that dumps like in and out of the medulla here, This loop is either called a nephron loop or a loop of Henle. When we get into lecture and we start talking about what absorbs what from where, you'll learn that different sides of the loop of Henle, based upon if the liquid is flowing down or flowing up, absorb or reabsorb different things in and out of the body. So the part of the loop of Henle where the liquid would be flowing down out of the proximal convoluted tubule, it's called the descending loop of Henle. And then you have the other side where the liquid is flowing back up is the ascending loop of Henle. Right? At that point, the next part of this tube is called the distal convoluted tubule. So you have a distal convoluted tubule here, right? That then connects to the collecting duct where urine is collected, run down to the renal papillae, and then go. So now we know that urine is formed in the nephron. This is your filtration functional unit of your kidney. So your blood is originally filtered here in the renal corpuscle, and then all that filtrate goes proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and then collecting duct to renal papillae, minor calyx, major calyx, renal pelvis, ureter. But we have to get into this a little itty bit more than that. So we need to zoom in on these renal corpuscles here, which is where the next part of your model comes from. And this is what is filtering what and how it's filtered. So we know that the renal corpuscle is what's actually filtering things from your blood, and then everything that's chemically happening between this renal corpuscle and this collecting tubule is changing that filtrate from filtrate extra stuff into urine, and then it goes out. Right? Into these renal corpuscles, you have a couple of blood vessels flowing. You have an arteriole flowing in and then an arteriole flowing out. The arteriole that is flowing in is called the afferent arteriole. The afferent arteriole is flowing in. The efferent arteriole is exiting. And you can notice on the model that your afferent is bigger because stuff has not been filtered out of this blood yet. But your efferent is slightly thinner and darker because things were filtered out of the efferent. So blood comes in through your afferent arteriole, is filtered, and then flows out of your efferent arteriole. This bundle of capillaries right here is called the glomerulus. You may remember that, or a word similar to that, because of the endocrine system when we were talking about parts of your adrenal gland. Because a zone of your adrenal gland is called the zona glomerulosa, and we will talk about that in just a moment. But this bundle of capillaries here is called the glomerulus, and it is what is actually doing the filtering. The glomerulus capillaries end up narrowing, so all of this filtrate inside it in blood has to go through narrower tubes, just like a high-pressure water hose. And all that filtrate, which is the extra stuff that you don't need in your blood, but not the blood vessels, ends up being filtered out between the cells. These are very porous capillaries here. The cells themselves, according to your lab list, are called podocytes. So the cells of the glomerulus are podocytes. Filtrate is then filtered out of your glomerulus, and your cleaned blood then flows out of this efferent arteriole. All of that filtrate, though, came out of your glomerulus and hit this protective wall around the glomerulus that's there like a bubble to catch stuff and protect it, called the Bowman's capsule. That can also be called the glomerular capsule, but more people remember Bowman's capsule. So you have the Bowman's capsule here, and all of that stuff that was filtered, that filtrate, comes out of your glomerulus into this capsular space between the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule, and then trickles down into this proximal convoluted tubule. Right? And that's how your kidneys function. Your blood is filtered here in the glomerulus. That filtrate comes out of the glomerulus into the capsular space between the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule, filters into the proximal convoluted tubule, goes from the proximal convoluted tubule, it's right here. So it goes to the proximal convoluted tubule here, next to the glomerulus, down the loop of Henle to concentrate the filtrate, reabsorb any water that your body may need, as well as give or take minerals that you may or may not need. We'll discuss that in lecture. And then your distal convoluted tubule finishes concentrating all that filtrate into urine. And then you have urine going down your collecting duct into your renal papillae, which then hits the minor calyx, which combine into a major calyx, which combine into your renal pelvis, which is then where all of that urine will flow down your ureters, be collected in your bladder further down, and then exit your body through your urethra. And there you have it. That is how your body filters urine. The only thing on your lab list that we need to discuss now about that is this weird little area here. Please notice that you had an afferent arteriole going into the glomerulus and renal capsule, into this Bowman's capsule, an efferent arteriole leaving, and your proximal convoluted tubule is right here going down, but your distal convoluted tubules kind of came back up around and looped around everywhere, right? Notice how the cells here are slightly different. You have different cells here, and this area where my little pointy stick is actually quite full of cells. It is full of different cells called granular cells or macula densa, right? And that area right here, this lovely area between the distal convoluted tubule, afferent arterioles, and efferent arterioles here, has a special name because of that macula densa and those specialized cells that live there. It is called the juxtaglomerular apparatus. In a lot of textbooks, they will start abbreviating that as the JGA. And yes, juxtaglomerular apparatus is on your lab list, but that is the juxtaglomerular apparatus, and the entire purpose of that juxtaglomerular apparatus and those macula densa cells there is to take constant readings from these afferent arterioles and efferent arterioles and the glomerulus about your blood pressure. And these happy juxtaglomerular cells and the macula densa there, from all of these individual glomeruli, right? All of them have this, and all of them are taking this reading, and all of them are taking this reading from the cortex of your kidney and sending direct information about all of that pressure back to, you guessed it, your adrenal gland. And what was the part of your adrenal gland that was closest to the surface called again, that was near your kidney? The zona glomerulosa. And what did the zona glomerulosa create as far as hormones go? Aldosterone, which controls your blood pressure. Each and every one of these little nephron bundles in your kidney has this juxtaglomerular apparatus here, taking instant readings from your afferent and efferent arterioles and glomerulus, and how much liquid you are filtering out in your distal convoluted tubule, so that it can calculate your current blood pressure and send that information next door to your adrenal gland, so your adrenal gland can create aldosterone and control your blood pressure. Because your body's goal is to not have this high pressure water hose system of tiny capillaries end up blowing out like you blow out a hose when you clog it up or send too much pressure through it. Because once that happens, bad things happen and your kidneys can't filter anymore. That's why high blood pressure is correlated so strongly with kidney problems and kidney disease. And this is why your kidneys and your adrenal glands were so important in controlling your blood pressure. And I know we talked about that a little bit in your cardiovascular and endocrine system units, but now you know the actual mechanisms down to the cell as for how that works and why. I'm going to leave you guys with all of this information and let you guys digest it. If you have any questions, please let me know. Have a wonderful evening.